Welcome back. Again, this is Naturang Batas, Likas na Tama, and the topic that we have is constitutional amendments. Dr. Villegas, this question about amending the Constitution is not a new thing. I mean, people have been asking constitutional amendment. I think even immediately after the Constitution has been ratified. How are these movements fared?
No, the first real effort was done during the time of President Estrada. He actually convened.
Not Ramos, not the.
No,
okay.
no, Estrada. He convened a group of 30, a number of them, like me, also from the old commission. Others were new faces, and he called it Concord, and the focus was exclusively on the economic provisions.
What happened with that one? How did that effort turn out?
Well, unfortunately, the president was removed, and then, however, the document from that body is there. It's very thorough analysis of why some economic provisions can be an obstacle to sustainable and inclusive development. That, of course, did not prosper once Estrada left. And then, towards the end of the presidency of President Arroyo, there was some kind of an effort to once again try to amend the Constitution. But there was the complication that people suspected that it was not only the economic provisions that would be amended, but certain political provisions to enable the former president to continue.
But officially the real thrust of the constitutional amendments was really on the economic provisions.
Yes.
Could you please tell us more? What were the findings made by the Concord, as you said, on the constitutional provisions on the economy that needs to be changed?
That there are so many provisions in the Constitution that should really be legislation and not part of the fundamental law. So all of these 60-40 restrictions for foreigners, those are so circumstantial. Sometimes it should be 100% foreign equity. Sometimes it could be lower, depending on what are the needs of the poor, especially.
Meaning, I mean, and this is for the audience as well, meaning it should not be, it's not because the 60-40 rule is bad or wrong, but what you're saying is that it should not be part of the Constitution.
Precisely.
And the reason being is for what? For the Congress to have the flexibility to change it depending on the need of the country at that particular time.
Exactly.
Aside from the 60-40 rule, what are the other areas you feel should not be part of the Constitution? At least as far as the economy is concerned.
Well, the declaration in the Statement of Principles that all sectors have to be Filipino controlled, and you know, this has really prejudiced a lot of poor people.
And I think this is something we have to explain. I mean, I think we're getting into a little bit more complicated territory.
But it can easily be explained. The Philippine economy has been controlled by a business elite. So we are still fundamentally a feudalistic society.
Is this what they call the oligarchy?
Exactly. And when you say we have to make sure that the Filipinos control, what we're actually saying is these people should continue to perpetuate their monopoly and oligarchy. And that's exactly what is still the situation. Now, if you allow foreign participation here, these people will not be as powerful in monopolizing. There will be a lot more competition.
Okay. Just to recast the discussion, essentially the oligarchy, as some economists say, is a group of small number of people, essentially coming perhaps from the same families, who control perhaps around 60, 80, depending on what number
Something
you can get
like
up,
that,
of the country's income or population.
Yes.
And what you're essentially saying is by allowing the liberalization, for example, of the economy, then that hold by the oligarchy will lessen. But some people will ask, what's the difference between having a foreign-dominated economy and an economy dominated by oligarchs? But wouldn't it be better because at least the oligarchs are Filipinos?
No, but the foreigners cannot dominate the economy because there will be so many of them, they don't have the feudalistic hold on specific sectors of the economy, they will just be here as investors. They have absolutely no political power.
But for a country coming off a colonial history, would that really be a good thing?
But that's it. We have to once and for all forget about our colonial past. Other countries that have been colonized even more brutally, like South Korea, Taiwan, and company, are welcoming foreigners much more than we. In fact, right now, even Vietnam, that is more even recent in its struggle against colonialism, attracts $7 billion worth of foreign investments every year, compared to our $1.5 to $2 billion a year. And so, we are a completely different global economy, where we need foreigners not only for capital, but for technology. Can you imagine if we rely on our own technology?
But again, and I have to keep back going on this point. The economic provisions that you're mentioning are the so-called nationalist or
Exactly.
nationalist economic provisions.
Exactly.
What's so wrong about nationalism? Shouldn't we be loving our country?
Definitely. We should love our country first and foremost, but there are so many things we can love in the Japanese, in the Americans, in the French. There's so many things that they have that can contribute to making our poor less poor. And since we have seen that our own local elite have not really made our poor less poor, so let's open the Philippines. But at any time, once we see that some foreigners are beginning to act like the local elite, then that's where the legislation can say, let's control that.
I think one of the areas would be also land ownership. What does the Constitution say now about land ownership?
Under our Constitution, private lands, foreigners are not allowed to acquire private lands.
Okay, but would other countries allow?
Except through hereditary succession.
Okay, what about Hong Kong? Allows, or does it not allow the
Well,
ownership
Hong Kong
of
is now part of China. Well, China still does not allow foreigners, but China has so many advantages over us in terms of very efficient infrastructures that the foreigners don't really look for that.
What countries do we know allow ownership of
Thailand,
land? Thailand,
even Vietnam has very long-term.
Singapore.
Singapore, no. Singapore is so small.
So, but would the ownership of land by foreigners really spur on economic growth? What's the difference between owning and then allowing them to lease it for 50 years, for example?
Yeah, no. In my opinion, precisely because we have tremendous handicaps. We have the poorest airports in the world. We have the highest cost of electricity. That added security to a foreigner, that he can own the land of the residence which he builds and of the factory that he puts up. I think that definitely will counteract the handicaps that we have.
Shifting the conversation to another area, and Elmer, you're being a civil law expert. You were talking earlier about during the break regarding the fact of marriage, of it not being defined in the Constitution. But marriage is defined, I think, in another area of law, and that is.
Sure, to clarify and to educate our audience, there are certain principles and state policies which are embodied in our Constitution, which cannot be changed by mere legislation. So, our Constitution is clear that it protects the social institution of marriage, but our Constitution does not define the concept of marriage. So that is best left by the Constitution to the sound discretion of our legislative body.
Assuming they have some discretion, that is the way.
Yes.
But as it is right now, Congress defines marriage to be between.
In the Family Code, Congress is in the Family Code, marriage is defined as a special contract of permanent union between a man and a woman.
And would there be an obstacle, for example, for assuming the political need for it arise? Would there be an obstacle in having the Constitution amendment to allow marriages, for example, between two men or two women?
In fact, there will
Would
be
it
no
would
need.
it contradict other constitutional provisions?
I believe that there will be no need for a constitutional amendment if in the event that Congress will enact a law allowing same-sex marriage, because as I've said earlier, the concept of marriage has never been defined in our Constitution.
But what about the family as an institution provision in Article 2? Would that be considered inconsistent with any plans to amend the family code, for example, to have same-sex marriages?
Okay, our constitution is clear that it protects the institution of marriage. Our constitution is clear that it likewise protects a family as the basic social institution. But again, since there is no definition of the concept of marriage in our constitution, it will now be left to the sound discretion of our legislative body whether or not to allow the same.
But again, I mean, again, coming again from my advocacy, whether or not a same-sex marriage as legislated by Congress could be inconsistent with natural law is something that has to be determined, of course, again, in the future. Moving back to you, Dr. Villegas, would you consider, in hindsight, the fact that there was no prohibition on contraception one of the major failings in the Constitution of 1987?
Prohibition
against contraception. Yes.
Against contraception.
Was there a discussion?
No, there was no discussion. And I think it would be very difficult to do that. I mean, it was very difficult to do that considering the composition of the Constitutional Commission.
But what do you say about the current debate right now ongoing with regard, I think Senator Tatad, one of his positions is that a contraception actually is in violation of the Constitution. What do you think of that position? I think, again, it boils back to the family and the definition of conception as we were talking about earlier.
Yes. Well, again, here is where you have going to technicalities. If the contraceptive approach used is abortifacient, that definitely goes against the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Now, if it is not, if it really prevents conception, then that's where there's a gray area. And probably those people who say that their conscience permits them, it's more difficult even to talk about natural law in that regard. Mm-hmm. Because as you know, natural law has primary principles, secondary principles, tertiary principles. When it comes already to artificial contraception, that's already a tertiary principle that is very difficult to convince others. No.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, the Constitution is something that's quite important, but as we've heard during the break, there's some seeming lack of people being educated in the Constitution. How important is our people getting to know the provisions of our very own Constitution?
Well, as an educator in economics, I've devoted a lot of my time in education to writing basic textbooks on economics and related issues. No, I think we should encourage people who are experts in the field of constitution to also write basic textbooks, at least at the level of high school, that will educate the population about the Constitution.
Well, I think that's a good point. I mean, we as lawyers, I think that the books that we know essentially cater to the legal profession.
Yes.
And I think that's a good point that more, at least for the layman, for the general public, more material should be made on the Constitution. What is your take on this one? I mean, how important is it for our people to get to know the Constitution
It's
more?
very, very important.
I mean, should they delegate it to lawyers like us? What do you think?
We have a duty as lawyers, we have a duty to educate the general public about our Constitution, it being the fundamental law, the basic law of the land.
But how should people get to know the Constitution more? I mean, what efforts should they make, you think, in order for them to get it done?
We can make use of the present medium nowadays. We can write about it in our blogs, in our social networking sites. I believe that is one way of educating the general public about.
And I think we have to show the public this. This is one. I think one of Dr. Villegas brought this. This is
one of the original documents of the 1987 Constitution, and so I think it has to be explained further. I mean, it's just a Constitution in its raw form, but you have a lot of annotations. You know, people should explain the various principles. No?
And I think that's the interesting thing. Because when we were studying law, I mean, our materials are essentially limited to this and to the textbooks and the. But right now, you can easily get a copy of the Constitution from anywhere, from the internet. You can just download it, even share it with on PDF files. So I think it's no excuse for people not to get to know the Constitution. Again, as we say, because it is indeed the fundamental law of the land. Well, that's it. I think we've run out of time, and sorry to say that, but I hope that we've more or less stimulated the people to be able to get to know more about the fundamental law and the issues confronting our very own constitution. I thank Dr. Villegas and Attorney Rabuya for joining us in this episode, and we'd like to invite you all again to join us in the next episode. This time it will focus on a very specific aspect of the Constitution, and that will be on checks and balances. And I think we've heard that term so many times, but what does it really mean? And our guest for the next episode will essentially explain that to us. Again, thank you very much. This is Naturang Batas, Likas na Tama. This is Jemy Gatdula saying good night or good day, and thank you very much.